you're listening to the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with Advantage Go, enabling an enterprise view of exposure. Today's podcast is another really positive and uplifting meeting with someone right at the top of their game. Fresh from posting record annual profits of over $1.4 billion on a top line that exceeded $6 billion for the first time, it was perhaps understandable to find Adrian Cox, CEO of Beazley, in excellent spirits. Whilst the market may be peaking in terms of pricing, speaking to Adrian, it certainly doesn't seem to be peaking in terms of profitable opportunity. And much of this podcast is a dissection of global specialist insurance opportunities in the world and how a top-tier progressive underwriter like Beazley is positioning itself to make the most of them. Whether it be fast-emerging new classes of insurance relating to the decarbonisation of the economy, burgeoning new geopolitical risk and complexity, the rise of parametric covers, the application of artificial intelligence, or indeed the fast-changing dynamics of how insurance itself is being transacted, this encounter reveals positive new thinking and investment in abundance. Listen on for all of this and more. I think if you listen closely enough, you can hear a distillation of Beazley's distinctive culture coming through, not just in what Adrian is saying about the issues of the day, but in the way he's saying it. It seems that it is possible that rigour and discipline, combined with worldly curiosity and a willingness to allow controlled experimentation in the understanding that not everything will go to plan, can all form key parts of a successful business culture. This is another good episode to file away for when you're in need of a morale booster. Adrian's enthusiasm and good humour are infectious, and I think you'll enjoy listening to this as much as I enjoyed recording it. Enjoy the podcast. Adrian, welcome back to the Voice of Insurance.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. It's great to be here.
It's become sort of like an annual fixture.
Yep.
It was probably just over a year ago when we last spoke, and it's been another really, really good year for Beazley.
Thank you.
I'm not here to do an analyst call with you, which is great. And hopefully that's a sigh of relief in your face that I can see.
Well, I've just spent the last 10 days on a roadshow, so yes, it's a relief not to have to repeat that. Yes.
Is it easier to do a roadshow when you have another really good year of good results, or is it just means it's harder because they're going to raise the bar on you all the time?
I think the thing that we said in our results that was most surprising was the increasing combined ratio guidance that we gave for 2025, and that provoked a lot of questions.
Why?
Yes. And then we said, well, there's been quite a big wildfire and the market's more competitive, and so we should expect margins to go down.
Yeah. My job as a journalist, when you do insurance journalism for 20 years, you know the Q3 and Q4 are ones that you spend a lot of time poring over, but you didn't expect Q1 to be the one.
No, I think that took us all by surprise, didn't it? Although it's been interesting to see how sanguine the market has been about it.
I'm so shocked that we're not really talking about it anymore. I'm going to ask you about that. My rule is if we can mention it, we might as well talk about it now. It sounds like it hasn't really affected the market, has it?
I don't think so, no. So it was unexpected in terms of when, because theoretically we were out of the wildfire season, but it wasn't unexpected enough, I think, to spook the market. It
was sort of in one of your playbooks and one of your scenarios that you said, well, you have to plan for this.
Yeah, and fundamentally at the moment in property reinsurance, there's more supply than demand, and that's still the case. And as I say, I don't think there was enough in there that was unexpected enough to make people really change their view of risk at the moment.
Which is probably a good thing. It's one definition of success as well, that things that might be shocking to other people haven't been shocking to us because, of course, it's our job. If we had planned for this.
I think that's right. I think the industry had contemplated wildfire better than it had done when the last big ones came in 17 and 18. I'm not sure the outcome was better. It was a shocking fire. The protection gap is more evident than ever. Underinsurance is more evident than ever. So the problems haven't gone away. But I think the insurance industry had done a better job of understanding the exposure and underwriting to it.
This has probably highlighted the problems with public policy. And luckily, it hasn't highlighted a whole load of terrible outliers in the insurance sector. We haven't really seen any of that.
No, agreed. But it does highlight the debate for how do you make communities more resilient to the impact of climate change, doesn't it?
Yes, certainly. I was just chatting with someone. They were trying to do the liability insurance for the people who are the actual workers who clear the brush.
Right.
And it's very tough. That's a tough right. It's almost impossible to get the insurance because they're sort of vicariously liable for practically 40 billion of subrogation against them, which is unbelievable, really, isn't it? When you think if your job is clearing brush.
Yeah. No, that's a tough.
That's a pretty standard sort of quite vanilla liability class, sort of taking the bins away type liability and trip and fall and that sort of thing. You wouldn't have think, actually, I'm potentially on the hook for $50 billion. So yes, one for your casualty team to be contemplating, surely an opportunity.
I shall write that down, Mark. Thank you.
So generally, what's the market like? Competitive, it sounds like, but full of opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. Prices are quite good generally. Certainly in the specialty market, I think demand continues to rise, so it's nice being in pools of risk that are growing. But the insurance industry is coming off the back of a few good years, and it's got a lot more capital than it did, and it's looking to deploy it. So yes, it is a bit more competitive.
Yes, certainly I'd say the thing that every balance sheet CEO I've spoken to in the last 4 or 5 months is that you're all quite keen to grow, and I suppose you all know that you can't all grow without changing the picture of that market. You can't all have the same appetites without it affecting. You're all competitive, you all want to compete, and you all want to write a bit more. So
yeah, so growth is more difficult to come by, isn't it? It's easier if, as I say, you're in pools of risk that are naturally growing because there are more new customers arriving, and that mitigates it a bit. But we've said, I think, that our top line growth will be lower this year simply because it's easier to grow when markets are dislocated rather than when everyone's looking to do the same thing.
But it's interesting what you're saying about deal flow. That's a good thing, that there's still flow coming into London, into the excess and surplus lines markets. Demand is still really holding up then.
Yeah. So if you look at the sort of 3 platforms that we have, we're still seeing business flow into the E&S market onshore in the US. That's nice and healthy. I think the rate of demand flow into London has slowed a bit, but there's still plenty of demand growth in Europe. So that optionality is also quite useful to have. And one of the big macro themes, I think, of the last 7 years has been that the amount of risk in the world is going up, and that drives the need for insurance. And that's good.
It's fundamentally good if you're in the insurance business.
Yeah, we can help.
We know where demand is strong in US casualty, US liability particularly. It's where the industry's had probably more debate about whether writing it is a good idea or not. Which side of the fence are you on in that debate?
In terms of US P&C?
Yeah, and US liability classes in general.
I mean, we're fairly cautious about US liability generally. We're not in what is referred to in the US as other liability occurrence business. So we don't do the GL and the excess casualty and so on and so forth, or the auto. So we write only claims-made business. So it's slightly different. Nonetheless, just because business is written on a claims-made form doesn't mean it's immune to the impact of social inflation and the impact of changing behaviours by the plaintiff bar and juries and so on and so forth. And it's a very difficult place to underwrite liability business at the moment, yes. And as we've talked about before, the underlying causes of social inflation haven't been tackled. And so it's difficult to see those trends changing.
It's because it's state by state. I saw some relatively positive headlines about Georgia, for example, recently, but there's still 49 other states that it's hard to package up tort reform and get it to be voted through. Then it takes time, of course, to actually take any kind of effect.
Very true. And even underlying that, why are juries angrier than they used to be is a bigger question.
Yes, it's a question that's well beyond our ken to solve, and most economists can't really understand. It's probably because they feel poorer and they feel angry. They feel that other people seem to be making more money than they do. Yeah,
and government programs to relieve that haven't been thought through or taken effect, right?
Yes, so that's way beyond our ken, isn't it?
That's a Voice of Society podcast rather than a Voice of Insurance podcast.
Well, yeah, but we are part of society. We're fundamentally important parts of society. But the interesting thing is, say, 20 years ago, we'd go to a conference and an insurance CEO would say, it's not fair, nothing works in the whole world without insurance. No one notices. We only notice when we're not here.
Yep.
Whereas then the planes don't fly and you don't have food on the table and then your school shuts down because there's no liability insurance for your local council, etc. But of course, now we're more in the crosshairs of, at least I think we're more in the debate in terms of, as an industry, that people realise that we're important. Particularly now in London, we see, all the protesters and these sort of people, that they know that we're a pressure point in society within the capitalist system. They know that we can have pressure put upon us. Whereas I think 20 years ago, they wouldn't have noticed.
I think that's true. And yes, there are more people protesting about insurers insuring oil companies and so on and so forth. And I think the role that we play to help make things happen is an important one, and to give companies the confidence to invest and so on and so forth. I do think we play a crucial role in the good functioning of a world economy, and therefore I think it's good that we're part of the debate. Absolutely.
It's kind of nice to be in the room to be realised.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Indeed.
And of course, that responsibility was there whether people realise it or not, and it was always there 30 years ago as well.
Yeah, so the sort of debates that are happening now following the wildfires this year about how do we holistically tackle the impacts of climate change and who's responsible for it and who pays for it and how do we all contribute, those are important conversations to have. And they're only just beginning, but at least we're in the room, as you say.
It's hard to grow in the market. It's hard if you haven't got any capital and you haven't got the resources.
Yep.
You had the capital, you had the resources because you had the good track record when the market had been on the way down. So, you were entrusted with that capital, was sort of first in line to get the capital, and therefore it was easier to grow in that harder market. And therefore that's easier to get expenses down as a percentage of your, obviously you probably never get them down in absolute terms ever, but they come down as a percentage of your top line as that expense ratio figure gets lighter as the market hardens. But conversely, if the rating environment's now softening, is that something that comes into focus a little bit with you? Because, well, just the way the mathematics is.
So one of the things that we've done over the last 3 years is to invest some of the money that we had through the growth to upgrade our infrastructure and to prepare for digitization at scale of the insurance industry. And I do think that will help us become more productive, and hopefully that will mitigate the impacts of, as you say, slowing revenue growth, because we shouldn't have to grow headcount as fast as we grow if we can get more productive across the value chain of what we do. But we'll need those investments to work.
Yes, it's one thing. I suppose you can tell investors that we're spending so many million on this, but
Yep.
I suppose it's the results that really matter.
Indeed. And insurance traditionally has been fabulously resistant to technology. So we'll see whether the kit that we're investing in now actually works. But I do think that technology has caught up with the complexities of what we do, and that it is possible to make a difference, actually, with the stuff that we're doing now.
And that culture change, certainly I feel it's palpable in the conversations that I have. We'd had this conversation 30 years ago in a bar on Lime Street. A lot of people would have actually said, I don't want it to change. And then I don't think you'll find a single person saying that they don't want things to change. Maybe literally it was the day before the retirement, maybe. But these days, do you think it's the attitude that's more important than the actual technology? It's the attitude to adopting the technology.
I think there's an acceptance that things are changing, whether people like that change or not. And that's reflected in the debate that's been had over the last couple of years around lead follow. There's an acceptance that the follow market is changing. Whether you like it or not is a different matter. But the debate's moved on in terms of, well, is it changing or not? There is now acceptance that that change is happening. Therefore, what do we do about that? Which is a slightly different conversation.
Yes. Well, let's have that conversation because, again, as a component of the expense ratio, you've been a prime mover in, for example, adopting the smart follow,
Yep.
some of the facilitization, that kind of thing, things that should decrease your underwriting expense.
Yep.
I'll have to put you on the spot because I don't think it's too early for you to have preliminary results of how that's working out for you, because I think hopefully you've been doing it now long enough. Because obviously you give up some control, but of course, if you have the technology and you have really good management information, you have really granular information on some of those more aggregate underwritings that you're doing, are you finding it is saving enough expense to pay for that little slight less of control for having written it yourself for your own account?
So the results of our smart tracker in terms of return on capacity since it started in 2018 have been better than 623, except for last year. So we have evidence that at least in the up stage of the cycle, that strategy can perform well. And I think it's been an interesting lesson to learn. The next stage of proof is, can it manage the softening cycle as well as it's managed the hardening? And we will try our best to do that.
So if I see headlines about global broker facilities where they're talking about the follow will take lead minus X, minus something, I suppose that's coming out of your bottom line ultimately, isn't it?
Well, it goes back to one of the roots of the debate in the first place, which is, should the follow market in insurance replicate from soup to nuts the same processes that lead go through? Is that a waste of expense? Can you save that expense? And who should benefit from those savings? And the answer is, well, everyone. It should benefit the client, it should benefit us, and it should benefit the broker. So we should get more efficient, and the client should benefit from that increase in efficiency, because the conversation that we were having a few years ago was, why are there 35 points of frictional costs in the administration of insurance? And part of the battle is to get that down. And I think the savings should be shared.
Yes. Now that the market's turning, do you think we're ever going to get much down to sort of nearer to whatever it's 31 or whatever the actual target is?
I think we should strive. And I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't strive. And I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't make some tangible progress now.
And what sort of proportion of business do you think? Are you kind of laissez-faire about it? Or do you have an idea of what's optimal? What proportion of business is your standard led or manually followed business versus the automatically followed business?
I don't have any preconceived ideas on that, but I think the market will find an equilibrium. But we haven't got there yet, I don't think.
With everything, the market will always find its way. And, for example, if brokers trying to place a follow facility on lead minus X and they can't place it, they have to do it slightly lead minus Y, and Y being less than X.
But there are a number of facets to it, aren't there? You want a strong lead. You want a group of people behind the leader who can take over the lead if they need to. You want to get the benefits of automation and efficiency. And at the same time, you need to contemplate how much your clients want automated and how much your clients want to be able to talk to the people who are taking the risk and ultimately paying the claims. And I think we are exploring what that balance should be.
Do you think it's something that might allow London to increase its global market share? Every time we look at the London Matters report, the only worrying statistic tends to be what is London's share of the global commercial market, for example.
Yeah.
And it has fallen a lot over the last 30 years, probably stabilised.
I think it's stabilised on the insurance side, hasn't it?
Yeah. But do you think it's an opportunity to recapture a lot of market share, for quicker, more efficient? It's got to help, hasn't it?
I think it does at the margin, yes. And again, back to where we were a few minutes ago, if we fundamentally believe that the world is getting more complex and riskier, then the benefits of being able to syndicate and atomize risk increase. And the better you can do that and the more efficiently you can do that, the more competitive you'll be.
Yeah, and so you almost, you can export that London market around the world, and we'd probably stop calling it the London market at some point and just say it's just the market. It's just the insurance market, isn't it? I mean,
it's one of the insurance markets, yes, indeed.
Obviously, you were talking about investment technology, and you couldn't be talking about technology in 2025 without talking about AI. I'm sure you're a very progressive insurer. You've been trying out different things,
Thank you.
Usually not shy in coming forward on
Yep.
these things. Where do you think the best use cases are lying? And there's lots of them.
There are lots of them, and we're running about 10 pilots at the moment, ranging from triaging risks to speeding up some of the processes in terms of digesting documents, helping some of the claims processes and so on and so forth. And we are gradually figuring out how to scale those. I don't think the development in using AI in terms of taking underwriting decisions has progressed as far as it has on the more operational side. I heard a great use case the other day, and it involved a food company who used AI to go through all the bills that the food company had paid for the materials that they'd received over the last 18 months and compared them to what they'd actually received from their warehouses. And this food company clawed back $1 billion in overpayments to its suppliers. Now, obviously, it's quite a big food company, but that is a remarkable use case. And so the ability to be able to do that kind of granularity of assurance around what you're doing is quite exciting. So I do think the use of AI is going to increase rapidly, but perhaps not in the ways that we'd first thought.
Good one for the claims department, absolutely.
There we go.
We think of all those materials to reconstruct a building after a loss. Were they all there?
Yeah, and all the bills that the claims team pay, absolutely.
Yes.
So lots of opportunities still, and I think we're beginning to translate some of those pilots into things that will make a real difference.
But at the moment, if I were to report back, it would be more of the low-hanging fruit things that are obviously just anything that's removing a dull administrative expense, a sort of administrative task that most people hate doing anyway, then that's got to be top of the list because that's going to be low-hanging fruit and everyone's going to be happy.
Yeah, and drawing information from different areas and bringing it together and comparing, contrasting, all that sort of stuff, yes.
Yeah.
It can do that stuff quickly and well.
Are you getting any feel for sort of numbers in terms of, I've spoken to some people and they say, what is the level of increased underwriting productivity, for example?
No, I don't have any numbers for that yet.
No.
But I did hear something else, if you're interested.
Of course.
So 2 new trends seem to be coming from people who are using AI more generally. The first is that it gets tired. So if you ask it questions for too long or too quickly, the quality of the answers go down. So you've actually got to treat it like you would a conversation with another person. And secondly, be nice to it. So you get better responses if you're nice when you're asking the questions. Plus, if it does come a time when the machines take over, you want them to remember that you were nice to them. Just a small hint.
Remind me not to be an impatient middle-aged man. Oh dear, yes. But it sounds really positive.
Yeah, I think so.
It sounds like you're taking it in the right kind of way. You're not putting a number on it and saying, I want 50% productivity because I've spent this much on this AI thing.
What we have been very careful to do is to put some measurements in place so that we can genuinely measure the impact that it has and realise those benefits, because that historically has not been something insurance has been very good at.
You've got to have that control group, haven't you? So, a bit like a medical trial, isn't it? You've got to say, well, how much more productive are the people doing it this way compared to the old way?
Exactly, and get some real proof.
Yes, I think you're right in terms of in the past, insurance industry was very poor at measuring things.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, I used to work at a broker, and I had a conversation about 15 years later with a friend who was then at Monte Carlo.
Okay.
And become more senior. And we'd had a discussion about the good old days. And so with the good old days, that with hindsight, none of the accounts we placed made us, the broker, any money because it was handling
the claims for decades afterwards.
Yeah, it was because there was no real management information to quantify that. And so now they would know not to do that anymore. So they wouldn't place Spanish primary liability business into London anymore because it's not a good thing to do.
Indeed.
Unless now it could be done electronically, maybe.
There we go. I'll write that one down too.
Well, I'm sure. I think you're in Spain actually, aren't you? So yes,
indeed we are.
Exactly. Just get down there and get speaking to those customers, and obviously in their own language and their own culture. I think it's something that no amount of AI or electronics is ever going to get around the fact that the buyer needs to know who you are and trust you and think you're a good fella.
Well, I think that's one of the inimitable things about insurance. One, you're estimating the cost of the price of your good when you sell it, and you learn exactly what the costs are later. So you're always learning. But two, you're trying to write a contract that can explain all that can go wrong. And what actually goes wrong is never exactly what you contemplated. And that requires the ability to talk and trust and negotiate and be consistent, because there's always grey areas in insurance. And managing that well is key to the industry thriving.
I'd say hats off to you, because I think that's something that Beazley has been known for. We all know that lawyers can write great wordings and underwriters and brokers can write reasonably good wordings, but actually the gods laugh at us, don't they?
Of course.
Every time there's a loss, it's really debatable. I mean, there's so many losses of grey.
There's always a wrinkle, and there's always something unexpected that's happening, and the world's changing.
We were planning for a pandemic in terms of mortality. We weren't planning for a pandemic in terms of business interruption shutdown.
No, or 18 months of the world not moving around.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So yes, reality always has an interesting way of catching up with us and creating lots of grey, wonderful grey things that very black and white wording did not contemplate.
Exactly.
And if you want to trade forward, you've got to look after the customer, because they trusted you. I'd say that's something that you've done well. And
thank you.
So you can be commended for. If you can bottle that, then that's the thing you need to be bottling as much of, that the culture is as important as any of the other technical side of things.
Thank you very much. That's very kind.
What an interesting time in Lloyd's. Obviously, you are a Lloyd's business. Are you still the biggest Lloyd's business? I haven't got my slide rule out recently, because obviously there's been certain changes of some of your distribution. Yeah,
we are still the biggest Lloyd's business. It still represents just under half of what we do.
Yes.
So it's a very important platform for us, the most important platform for us, measured by premium.
We're in an interesting time with Lloyd's in a transition. This is probably a transition that hasn't happened this way before. We'd have a new chairman and a new CEO at the same time. And now, obviously, there's definitely a new CFO as well. So that might create an opportunity to change things if you wanted things to change, or there'll be new personnel. And I'm sure, well, you're going to be top of their list. I mean, Adrian, can you come over and sit by the fire and we'll have a drink, have a cup of tea or something, and tell me what you think? Well, they might be canvassing you. When they come and canvass you for we say, well, Adrian, what do you think we should be doing, or anything that's top of your priority list? What would you be saying to them?
So I think they've been canvassing the market fairly broadly as to what the market would like in terms of a chair and a CEO and so on and so forth. And, what we've been saying is that the brand and reputation and performance of the Lloyd's market has improved enormously over the last 7 years, and that is credit to the outgoing leadership team. And I think the quality of oversight has been good. I think their guidance on the really big topics of the day has been clear. I think they've demonstrated some really good leadership in the market at some quite difficult times, and more of the same, please.
And you're not available.
I was very perturbed that I was on no lists circulating around, yes.
Oh, that's the worst thing is, this poor journalist writes a runners and riders story, which we've sort of pulled out of the bottom drawer, which was the same story as we ran 5 years before, probably. And then, of course, you end up offending people by either putting them on it or then, even worse, not putting them on it.
Yeah, in some cases, mortally offended.
Other thing about the world's changing, obviously, geopolitics rumbles on as it does.
Yep.
Ebbs and flows, and the tides go in and they go out. How does that affect some of the things that you're doing when you're looking at your business planning? For things like the transition, energy transition, those sort of things. Do you try not to let it bother you, or do you just look at the demand? More importantly, I suppose you jump to what your customers are saying rather than what politicians are saying.
So broadly, yes. I think as geopolitics changes, exposures change. So some areas of the world get more risky and some others of the world may get less risky. And I think we have to make a judgment about what impact that should have on how we underwrite and how we want to take risk. I think broadly speaking, politics should be irrelevant to us. And so all the stuff that's going on around trade alliances and tariffs and so on and so forth doesn't really impact us one way or the other. Unless, as you say, it impacts demand or how business is distributed or the exposures that we have to contemplate.
Yes, and it's going to affect loss costs if every steel girder costs 25% more in the world.
Sure.
It's all very well. And if they're retaliatory tariffs on everything, everything's going to go up, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, if your rating base is the value of the asset and the value of the asset goes up, then you're paid for the extra risk you take, aren't you? Probably more pertinently is that if geopolitical alliances change, and that changes the politics of countries that, say, house cyber criminals, does what those cyber criminals do change over time? That's the sort of exposure change I'm referring to.
And it changes everything. I suppose if investment flows therefore change, then you're going to get less demand in some places and probably, hopefully, compensated by more demand in other places. And if you have global licensing, it doesn't matter so much.
Yes, but I do think it means that one needs to think about the impact of those exposure changes and what to do about it.
One last thing was my Columbo question, is it? But I think it's something I genuinely missed. We were talking about things that happen when the market softens slightly.
Yep.
And one other thing that often happens is that innovation gets more of a hearing. I find that usually at the bottom of the soft market, the more expansive and exciting things tend to happen. But a lot of really good things tend to come out of the bottom of the soft market. The Lloyd's Lab, for example, I'm going to go over there after this, actually. Always exciting and unqualified success, probably. But right at the bottom of the soft market, I was probably with my cynical journalist hat on thinking, this is someone clutching at straws trying to get innovation to happen. But actually, very laudable thing to have done, because you can't make innovation happen if you don't try and encourage it and just give it a space to happen, give it a chance and try. So, I mean, that's a fantastic thing. So is it easier to get innovative ideas off the ground in a softening market? And is there more of an imperative to do so? Because obviously the classic thing about the hard market is, go away, we're too busy making money when someone comes with a new idea. We're making too much money out of the old stuff. Go away and come back when the market's soft, and then we'll give you a better hearing.
Sort of. I think there's usually a reason for the hard market, which is things are perceived as difficult. So navigating through a hard market uses up a lot of bandwidth. So I think there is less bandwidth to think more broadly about stuff if you're caught up trying to navigate a complex market and the reasons why that market is turning in the first place. Having said that, I think there's been a reasonable amount of product innovation over the last few years anyway, and quite a lot of the innovation that we are investigating right now is driven by what's changing in the world. So we're interested in transition products. Why? Because the evidence of companies wanting to invest in that transition is increasing. We're interested in property risk. Why? Because climate change is obviously making property risk more complex, and are there different ways that we can tackle that? And so the increasing popularity of parametric insurance, for example, is an interesting evolution in that, responding to genuine changes in demand. And so I think what's been exciting about innovation over the last few years is not because it's people desperately searching for new things to do because they've run out of road in what they do currently, but it's because there's obviously demand for different things because the world's changing. And that's quite energizing, actually.
So, yes, I suppose you just got to keep doing what you're doing and keep trying out new ideas, the ones that sound good, obviously.
Yeah, and give them a sandbox. Don't take too much risk, but take some risk and then learn.
Any of the ones you're most particularly excited about, and obviously, you're a cyber leader, when you look at sort of all those interesting little saplings that might grow into great mighty oak trees to be another cyber, which one would you get most excited about? For example, a parametric, I find it difficult to see it becoming this all-encompassing thing because obviously it would be limited. For example, it has to be a sophisticated buyer to buy a parametric product to start with.
Well, it's one end of the chain or the other, isn't it?
Yeah.
So parametric insurance, I think, has a use for communities that can't afford to buy full-fat indemnity insurance. At the other end of the scale, there are sophisticated clients who say, I have an insurance tower, which works, but actually one of the first things I need in the event of a big loss is immediate cash flow.
Yeah.
And so parametric insurance actually has a strategic place in my risk transfer solutions because it fulfills a specific need. That piece of thinking is relatively new, and that is scalable to a certain extent, and it fulfills a specific need, and I quite like that.
It's nice not to have to be worrying about grey areas.
No.
Well, one hopes it is black and white. Of course, oddly enough, it's not always black and white because some of the ones after the great Tohoku earthquake, of course, were some of the monitoring stations that were parametrics based on what was the Mercalli scale of the quake. Was it 8.9 or was it 9.1? It was a material question.
I didn't know.
And it was hard to know because it had to be approximated because the quake had actually destroyed the station.
That's a shame.
And a lot of the wind measuring devices get blown away as well, don't they? Well, they used to. I don't know if they're all sort of made of solid concrete or something, but
that would be unfortunate, wouldn't it, if the devices that were there to measure a loss.
It's once again the gods laughing at our best laid plans.
Exactly. But I do think that evolution of that market is an interesting one. And we're working on a project at the moment trying to figure out how to insure a couple of plants that are being built to try to scale up nuclear fusion. Fabulous. Really interesting. Great stuff to do. And there's lots of that stuff poking around at the moment.
That's going to be very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, where do you even start? I suppose you start by doing it, don't you?
You start by looking at how comparable things have been insured in the past. And so how did governments think about liabilities when they first drilled in the sea for oil, for example, or first sent satellites into space? And you apply some of those learnings with this.
Excellent. Well, that sounds like it should be another whole podcast about innovation. Any other things you're particularly excited about? What's the sort of, you think, the most nailed on, really nice, strong growing line that everyone will be looking at in 10 years' time?
I kind of mentioned this a couple of minutes ago, but we do see the flow of investment money into decarbonisation increasing rapidly, irrespective of politics around the world.
Yeah, you could follow the money.
And a lot of that will need insurance, and a lot of that insurance is yet to be written, and that's super interesting.
I've done some interesting podcasts with people about insuring carbon credits themselves, which is fascinating.
Yep, exactly.
Again, a whole new asset.
A whole new asset class. Yeah.
Which is going to be a genuine asset, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the two words in net zero is net, which implies some offsetting, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So yes, that would be very interesting. So it's all around the transition technologies.
Yeah, a lot to do.
They're often sort of cross-denominational, aren't they? You need quite a lot of collaboration between the different departments. It's a bit of property, it's a bit of this, it's a bit of credit, it's a bit of something else, a bit of political risk.
Yes.
So you've got a joined-up organisation.
Yes.
You can really.
So how do you bring all that together so that you face to the client and the financiers, this is what we can do across the piece with regards to this sort of thing, rather than, as you say, being siloed in 15 different teams?
We've seen some other carriers face that by actually creating another silo and calling that a transition, for example. Is that the way to do it? Sometimes it's almost the only way to do it. Is it just to say, I'm going to have to create a new bucket over here, and then it will definitely exist?
Maybe, although one of the other things we don't want to lose is the IP in the specialty products that we have. So we're trying to figure out how to have our cake and eat it.
That sounds like a good way of ending the podcast. Just have your cake and eat it, Adrian.
There you go. Thank you.
Check in and see how it's going for you.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this programme. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry.
The Voice of Insurance is produced in association with Advantage Go. Release your underwriters to underwrite with Advantage Go's underwriting platform.
Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.